For 48 years, she had no name. For 48 years, she was known only by where she died, the Lady of the Dunes. Found brutally murdered on a Cape Cod beach in 1974, her killer had done everything possible to ensure she would never be identified. Her hands were cut off, her teeth were nearly removed, her identity was erased as thoroughly as footprints in sand. But in 2022, something extraordinary happened. Modern science cracked open this ice-cold case, revealing not just her name, Ruth Marie Terry, but exposing her killer as a serial murderer who had gotten away with it before. This is the full story of one of Massachusetts' most haunting mysteries, a case that captivated a nation and proved that sometimes justice just needs time. July 26, 1974, started like any other summer day in Provincetown, Massachusetts. The sun was already warming the sand dunes of Race Point Beach when 12-year-old Leslie Metcalfe set out for a morning walk with her parents. They were returning from visiting friends, and a couple of the friends' dogs had decided to tag along, racing ahead through the scrub grass and sand. Leslie loved the beach in the early morning. The tourists had not yet arrived, leaving the vast expanse of sand and sea to locals like her family. She watched the dogs dart between the dunes, their tails wagging with pure joy. Then suddenly, one of the dogs stopped. Its tail dropped. It began barking, not the playful bark of a dog at play, but something urgent, alarmed. The dog had found something in a cluster of scrub pines, about 30 feet from the parking area. Leslie, curious as any 12-year-old would be, ran toward the commotion. Her parents called after her to be careful, but she was already cresting the small dune. At first, her brain could not process what she was seeing. The morning sun created strange shadows, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she was looking at a dead deer. The color was wrong for human skin, too brown, too still. But as her eyes adjusted and the reality sank in, Leslie let out a scream that would echo in her nightmares for decades. It was a woman, and where her hands should have been, there was nothing. Leslie's parents reached her within seconds, pulling her away from the gruesome scene. Her father sprinted back toward the parking area to find a phone while her mother held Leslie, trying to shield her from the sight. But the image was already burned into the young girl's memory, the woman lying on a beach blanket, her head resting on folded jeans, looking almost peaceful except for the violence that had been done to her. Within an hour, Race Point Beach was transformed into one of the largest crime scenes in Cape Cod history. Police cars lined the parking area. Yellow tape sectioned off huge swaths of beach. Detectives in suits looked out of place, trudging through the sand, their dress shoes filling with grit. Detective James Costa was one of the first investigators to examine the body closely. What he saw made him sick to his stomach, and Costa had seen plenty in his 20 years on the force. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, with long reddish-brown hair pulled back in a ponytail with a gold-flecked elastic band. She was naked except for that hair tie, lying on a blanket with her head cushioned by a pair of Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana. But it was the deliberate cruelty of her murder that stood out. She had been nearly decapitated, with massive trauma to the left side of her skull. Both hands had been severed at the wrists. The left arm was missing entirely from the elbow down. The cuts were clean, deliberate. This was not the frenzied attack of someone in the heat of passion. This was calculated. Dr. George Katsas, the medical examiner, arrived by noon. His initial examination at the scene revealed even more disturbing details. The woman had been dead for at least 2 weeks, possibly 3. In the July heat, decomposition was advanced, but certain things were still clear. She had been struck multiple times in the head with a heavy, blunt object. The removal of her hands had been done post-mortem, likely with a saw or similar tool. Whoever did this, Dr. Katsas told the assembled investigators, did not want her identified. This level of mutilation, the specific targeting of identifying features, I've never seen anything quite like it. The Provincetown Police Department was not equipped for a murder of this magnitude. Chief James Meads immediately called in the Massachusetts State Police, and within hours the biggest murder investigation in Cape Cod history was underway. Every hotel, motel, and guest house in Provincetown was canvassed. Did anyone recognize the description? Was anyone missing a guest? The woman had expensive dental work, some $10,000 worth of gold crowns, what dentists called New York work. She was not some drifter. Someone, somewhere, had to be missing her. But as days turned into weeks, no one came forward. No missing person report matched her description. No family called looking for a woman who had not come home. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air onto that beach blanket, only to be brutally murdered by someone who knew exactly how to keep her identity secret. The Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab worked around the clock processing evidence. The beach blanket was generic, sold in thousands of stores. The jeans were Wranglers, size 32-30, also widely available. The blue bandana had no distinguishing marks. Even the elastic hair tie, despite its gold flecks, was mass-produced. But there were some clues. Sand found on the blanket contained microscopic shells that suggested it had been on the beach for the full 2 to 3 weeks since the murder. The woman's toenails were painted pink, and the polish was barely chipped, suggesting she had applied it shortly before her death. Most intriguingly, there were no defensive wounds on her arms, no sign she had fought back. Detective Costa developed a theory. She knew her killer. She was comfortable enough to lie down on that blanket, maybe to sunbathe or sleep. The first blow came without warning. She never had a chance to fight back. The lack of identification was maddening. In 1974, before DNA testing or computer databases, identification relied on fingerprints, dental records, and missing person reports. With no hands and no one reporting her missing, investigators were left with dental records as their only hope. Dr. Katsas made detailed castings of the woman's teeth and sent them to dental associations across the country. The gold work was extensive and expensive. Someone had to have records. But inquiries to hundreds of dentists from Boston to New York to Philadelphia yielded nothing. Either the work had been done abroad, or the dentist who did it was not responding to inquiries. Provincetown in the summer of 1974 was a haven for artists, writers, and the LGBTQ community. The brutal murder shattered the town's sense of safety. Beach attendance plummeted. Parents kept their children close. The annual Carnival Week celebration, scheduled for August, nearly got cancelled. "We've always been a place where people could be themselves, could feel safe," said longtime resident Patricia Miller. This murder changed everything. Suddenly we were locking our doors, looking over our shoulders. The Lady of the Dunes, that's what people started calling her, became this ghost haunting our summer. Police Chief Meads held daily press conferences, pleading for information. A composite sketch of the woman's face was published in newspapers across New England. The response was overwhelming and useless. Hundreds of tips poured in, each requiring investigation, each leading nowhere. One caller claimed the woman was his missing sister from Ohio. Detectives spent a week tracking down the lead, only to find the missing sister alive and well in Florida. Another tipster was certain the woman was a Russian spy, killed by the KGB for defecting. That lead consumed dozens of hours before being dismissed as fantasy. The most promising lead came from a Provincetown innkeeper who remembered a woman matching the description checking in with a man in early July. She had signed the register as Terry Morgan from Montreal, but when investigators checked, they found the address in Montreal did not exist, and no one named Terry Morgan could be found in Canadian records. By October 1974, with no new leads and winter approaching, authorities made the difficult decision to bury the Lady of the Dunes. On October 12th, a small funeral was held at St. Peter's Cemetery in Provincetown. Town officials, police officers, and curious residents gathered to pay respects to a woman none of them knew. Reverend Richard Hurst, who performed the service, later recalled, "It was one of the most difficult funerals I ever conducted. How do you eulogize someone when you don't know their name, their story, anything about their life? I focused on the universal, that she was someone's daughter, perhaps someone's mother, certainly someone who deserved better than to die violently and alone." The gravestone was simple, heartbreaking in its anonymity. Unidentified female body found Race Point Dunes, July 26, 1974. But even as dirt was shoveled onto her coffin, investigators vowed the case would not be buried with her. The late 1970s brought new hope with advancing technology. Facial reconstruction techniques had improved, and in 1978, investigators commissioned a new clay model of what the woman might have looked like in life. When the reconstruction was unveiled, it seemed like a breakthrough was imminent. The image was haunting. A woman with high cheekbones, full lips, and sad eyes that seemed to plead for justice. The reconstruction was photographed and distributed nationwide. Major newspapers ran front-page stories. TV news programs featured segments on the Lady of the Dunes. Margaret Chabot of New Bedford was certain she recognized the face. It was her cousin Linda, who had disappeared in 1974 after a fight with her husband. Detectives spent weeks investigating, interviewing family members, tracking down leads. The resemblance was striking. But when they finally located Linda's ex-husband in California, they found Linda living with him. She had never been missing, she had just cut off contact with her family. Another promising lead came in 1980, when the body was exhumed for the first time. New forensic techniques allowed for more detailed analysis. Hair samples were taken for potential future testing. More detailed dental impressions were made. Tissue samples were preserved in hopes that someday science would advance enough to identify her. Dr. Clyde Snow, a renowned forensic anthropologist, examined the remains. He confirmed earlier findings, but added new details. The woman had given birth at least once. She had a healed fracture in her left arm, probably from childhood. She had been in good physical health at the time of her death. Every bone tells a story, Dr. Snow explained to investigators. This woman lived a full life before her death. She was a mother. She had survived hardship. Someone, somewhere, had to be missing her. In the mid-1980s, the investigation took a sensational turn, when investigators began exploring connections to James Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston crime boss. The theory was not as far-fetched as it might seem. Bulger was known to visit Provincetown. He had connections to the area, and he had a history of extreme violence. The connection was first suggested by a woman named Judith Chartier, who claimed she had seen Bulger in Provincetown, with a woman matching the Lady of the Dunes description just days before the body was discovered. According to Chartier, she had been at the Provincetown Inn when Bulger entered with a attractive redhead. The woman seemed nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. "I knew who Whitey was," Chartier told investigators. "Everyone in Massachusetts knew to stay away from him, but this woman was with him voluntarily, even if she looked scared. When I saw the composite sketch years later, I was sure it was her." Investigators spent months pursuing the Bulger angle. They discovered that Bulger had indeed been in Cape Cod that summer. Multiple witnesses placed him in Provincetown. His known associates were questioned, but in the world of organized crime, no one talks. The theory gained more credibility when investigators learned about Bulger's methods. He was known to remove teeth from his victims to prevent identification. He had access to tools and locations where a body could be dismembered. He had killed women before. But despite the circumstantial connections, no hard evidence ever linked Bulger to the Lady of the Dunes. When Bulger was finally captured in 2011 after 16 years on the run, investigators hoped he might confess to unsolved murders. He admitted to 19 killings, but never mentioned the Lady of the Dunes. Perhaps the most bizarre theory in the case emerged in 2015 from an unexpected source. Joe Hill, the horror writer, son of Stephen King, was watching Jaws when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The Steven Spielberg classic had been filmed on Martha's Vineyard in the summer of 1974, just miles from Provincetown. In a crowd scene on the beach, Hill spotted a woman who looked remarkably like the composite sketches of the Lady of the Dunes. More disturbing, the extra appeared to be wearing the same blue bandana and jeans found with the body. Hill posted his theory online, and it went viral. Could the Lady of the Dunes have been an extra in one of Hollywood's most famous films? The timing worked perfectly. Jaws was filming when the murder occurred. Hundreds of locals and tourists were hired as extras for the beach scenes. The theory captivated the public imagination. Here was a murder victim possibly preserved on film, captured in her final days by one of cinema's greatest directors. News outlets around the world picked up the story. Amateur sleuths pored over every frame of Jaws looking for clues. But Universal Studios had no records of extras' names from 1974. The production's paperwork had long since been destroyed or lost. Even if the woman in the film was the Lady of the Dunes, it brought investigators no closer to identifying her. Hill himself was careful to call it just a theory. "I'm not saying it's definitely her," he wrote, "but the resemblance is uncanny, and the timing is right. If it is her, it's both tragic and somehow fitting. A murder victim immortalized in a film about death coming from the sea." The year 2000 brought new hope with advances in DNA technology. The body was exhumed for a second time, and this time, scientists were able to extract viable DNA. For the first time, the Lady of the Dunes had a genetic profile that could be compared to databases of missing persons. The exhumation was conducted with painstaking care. Technology had advanced so much since 1974 that scientists needed only tiny samples to build a complete genetic profile. Hair, bone, and tooth samples were carefully collected and sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification, one of the leading facilities for identifying unknown remains. Within weeks, they had a complete mitochondrial DNA profile. This type of DNA, passed down through the maternal line, could be compared to relatives of missing women. The profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, and investigators waited for a match. But none came. Month after month, the profile was compared to new entries in the database. Families of missing women from the 1970s submitted their DNA, hoping for answers. Each comparison came back negative. Dr. Arthur Eisenberg, who oversaw the DNA analysis, was philosophical about the lack of matches. It just means her family hasn't submitted DNA yet, or perhaps she has no living maternal relatives. But the profile is there now, waiting. Someday someone will submit DNA that matches, and we'll know who she was. By 2010, many of the original investigators had retired or passed away. But the Lady of the Dunes case had become a cause célèbre, attracting a new generation of investigators determined to solve it. Provincetown Police Chief Jeff Duran made it his personal mission to identify the woman. "I drive by that cemetery regularly," Chief Jaron told reporters. "Every time I see her grave, marked unidentified, it bothers me. In this day and age, with all our technology, how can someone remain nameless? She deserves better." Jaron organized a task force that included cold case specialists, forensic genealogists, and digital age detectives who understood how to leverage social media and online databases. They created a Facebook page for the Lady of the Dunes, hoping to reach people who might have information but had never come forward. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from around the world. Most were from amateur sleuths offering theories, but some contained potentially valuable information. A woman in Tennessee wrote that her aunt had disappeared in 1974 and was never found. A man in California said his mother had abandoned the family that summer and might have gone to Cape Cod. Each lead was meticulously investigated. The task force traveled across the country, interviewing families, collecting DNA samples, chasing ghosts. The woman from Tennessee's aunt was found buried in a family cemetery. She had died of natural causes. The man from California's mother had indeed abandoned her family, but she had died in Mexico in 1991. In 2021, everything changed. The same genetic genealogy techniques that had identified the Golden State Killer were now being applied to unidentified remains cases. The FBI, working with cutting-edge genealogy companies, began building family trees from the Lady of the Dunes DNA. The process was complex and time-consuming. Starting with the DNA profile, genealogists looked for partial matches in public databases like GEDmatch, where people upload their genetic information to find relatives. Even distant cousins could provide clues that might lead to identification. Investigative genetic genealogist Leslie Kaufman worked on the case for months. She started with fourth and fifth cousins, slowly building family trees that might converge on a woman who disappeared in 1974. The work was like solving a massive puzzle where most of the pieces were missing. "You're looking for a woman born between roughly 1930 and 1950 who went missing in summer 1974, Kaufman explained. You build these family trees and look for branches where someone disappears from records around that time. It's meticulous work, but when you find that person, it's like finding a ghost." By summer 2022, the team had narrowed their search to a few family lines in Tennessee. One name kept surfacing in their research: Ruth Marie Terry. Records showed she had married a man named Guy Muldavin in Reno, Nevada, in February 1974. After that, she vanished from all official records. On October 31st, 2022, Halloween, fittingly, the FBI called a press conference in Boston. Special Agent Joseph Bonavolonta stood before a room packed with reporters, many of whom had covered the Lady of the Dunes case for years. After 48 years, 3 months, and 5 days, Bonavolonta announced, "We are able to tell you the Lady of the Dunes' name. She was Ruth Marie Terry, born September 8, 1936. She was 37 years old when she was murdered." The room erupted. After nearly 5 decades, the Lady of the Dunes had her name back. But Bonavolonta was not finished. "We have also identified her killer. Ruth Marie Terry was murdered by her husband, Guy Muldavin, who died in 2002. With identification came a life story that was both ordinary and heartbreaking. Ruth Marie Terry was born in a small shack on a Tennessee mountainside during the Great Depression. Her mother Eva died young, leaving Ruth to be raised by relatives in poverty. She was always looking for something better, her cousin Patricia recalled. Even as a young girl, Ruth dreamed of leaving Tennessee, of making something of herself. She was smart, beautiful, full of life. In 1957, Ruth made good on her dreams, moving to Michigan for work. She found a job at the Fisher Body automotive plant in Livonia, a good-paying position that offered hope for the future, but life had other plans. In 1958, Ruth gave birth to a son, Richard. As an unwed mother in the 50s, she faced impossible choices. Unable to support the child alone, she made the agonizing decision to allow her supervisor, Richard Hanchett, to adopt the boy. In exchange, Hanchett paid off her debts. It was a wound that never healed. Ruth spent the next 15 years drifting between states, working various jobs, searching for something she could never quite define. In 1972, she reached out to her son, now a teenager, but Richard had recently survived a near-fatal drug overdose and was not ready for a reunion with the mother who had given him up. That rejection broke her, said her half-brother Jim. She wanted so badly to make things right with her boy. When he said no, something in her just gave up. Guy Rockwell Muldavin entered Ruth's life when she was at her most vulnerable. They met in California in late 1973, and by February 1974, they were married in a Reno chapel. To Ruth, Muldavin must have seemed like salvation, a successful antiques dealer, charming, worldly. But Muldavin had a dark history that Ruth could not have known. In 1960, his third wife Manzanita and her daughter Dolores had vanished from their Seattle home. When police investigated, they found human remains in the septic tank, but forensic science in 1960 could not definitively prove the remains were Manzanita and Dolores. Muldavin walked free. He was a psychopath, said retired Seattle detective Robert Thorson, who worked the Manzanita case. Charming on the outside, but absolutely capable of murder. When I heard he was connected to the Lady of the Dunes, I wasn't surprised at all. Ruth's family met Muldavin only once, when the newlyweds visited Tennessee in spring 1974. Her relatives immediately sensed something wrong. Muldavin controlled every aspect of Ruth's behavior, what she ate, when she spoke, where she went. He never let her out of his sight, recalled Ruth's niece. If she started to tell a story about her life, he'd interrupt and finish it for her. She seemed scared of him, but we didn't know how to help. The couple left Tennessee in late spring, telling family they were heading to New England to hunt for antiques. It was the last time anyone who loved Ruth would see her alive. Investigators pieced together Ruth and Muldavin's movements through credit card records and witness accounts. They were seen in various antique shops across New England in June and early July 1974. Dealers remembered Muldavin as knowledgeable but aggressive, often arguing about prices. Ruth was quiet, staying in the background. On July 4th, they were spotted in Provincetown. A bartender at the Atlantic House remembered serving them. She seemed sad, he recalled. Beautiful woman, but something in her eyes, like she'd given up. The man she was with did all the talking. Sometime between July 4th and July 12th, Guy Muldavin murdered his wife on that lonely stretch of beach. The exact circumstances may never be known, but investigators believe he struck her while she slept on the beach blanket, then mutilated her body to prevent identification. After the murder, Muldavin returned to Tennessee alone. He told Ruth's family that they had argued during their honeymoon and she had left him. He seemed unconcerned about his missing wife, staying only briefly before leaving with all of Ruth's belongings. Ruth's brother Jim was immediately suspicious. He hired a private investigator who reported back that Ruth had supposedly joined a religious cult. The family never believed this story, but without evidence of foul play, there was nothing they could do. Guy Muldavin lived another 28 years after murdering Ruth. He moved frequently, using various aliases, always staying one step ahead of any suspicion. In 1976, he was living in Colorado. By 1984, he had relocated to Los Angeles. He was a master manipulator, said FBI agent Sarah Chen, who researched Muldavin's life after Ruth's identification. He reinvented himself constantly. In Los Angeles, he was a respected antiques dealer. No one knew about his past. Muldavin died on May 6, 2002, in Los Angeles County. He was 78 years old and took his secrets to the grave, or so he thought. 20 years later, DNA evidence would finally expose him as a serial killer. The FBI continues to investigate whether Muldavin had other victims. His pattern, marrying vulnerable women, isolating them from family, and then killing them, suggests Ruth may not have been his only victim. Cases of missing women from the 60s through the 80s are being re-examined for connections to Muldavin. In June 2023, Ruth Marie Terry's remains were exhumed from St. Peter's Cemetery in Provincetown. After 49 years as the Lady of the Dunes, she was going home to Tennessee. The reburial service in her hometown was attended by family members who had never stopped wondering what happened to her. Her nephew spoke at the service. Ruth's life was hard, but she never stopped trying to find happiness. That someone could murder her and steal her very identity for nearly 50 years is a crime beyond the killing itself. Today we give her back her name and bring her home. Ruth's son Richard, now in his 60s, attended the service. It was the reunion Ruth had wanted so desperately, coming far too late. "I wish I had been ready to meet her when she reached out," he said through tears. "Maybe things would have been different." The identification of Ruth Marie Terry made headlines around the world. It was proof that cold cases could be solved, that the nameless could be named, that justice delayed was not always justice denied. For the investigators who had worked the case over 5 decades, the identification was bittersweet. "We always said we'd solve it," reflected retired Detective James Costa. "But I thought I'd be long dead before it happened." Technology gave Ruth her name back. The case has changed how unidentified remains are handled. DNA is now routinely collected and preserved. Genetic genealogy is becoming a standard tool in cold case investigations. The Lady of the Dunes helped pave the way for these advances. In Provincetown, the case remains a defining moment in the town's history. A memorial plaque now stands near where Ruth's body was found, reminding visitors that she was more than a mystery. She was a person who deserved to be remembered. The Lady of the Dunes case offers profound lessons about persistence, the advance of science, and the value of every human life. For 48 years, Ruth Marie Terry was a puzzle to be solved, rather than a person to be mourned. Her identification restored her humanity. The case also demonstrates how predators like Guy Muldavin operate. They target vulnerable people, isolate them from support systems, and count on society's indifference to protect them. Muldavin almost got away with the perfect murder. Almost. Most importantly, Ruth's story reminds us that behind every cold case is a real person with hopes, dreams, and people who loved them. Ruth Marie Terry was a daughter of Tennessee who gave up a child, sought love, and found death instead. She deserved better in life. At least in death, she finally has her name. The Lady of the Dunes is a mystery no more. Ruth Marie Terry has come home, and somewhere in the afterlife, perhaps she finally has the peace that eluded her in life. Her story, once untold, will now never be forgotten. This case may be solved, but there are thousands more waiting in the shadows. Subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex, where we bring you the most mind-bending true crime stories from around the world. Hit the bell icon. Trust me, you'll want to be first to see what dark secrets we uncover next.